because we should nest this very important and sensitive question in a wider debate about how we care for our loved ones towards the end of their lives. And so the social care debate is important, and we have clear manifesto commitments there. And understandably, with the pandemic, we've taken a bit more time to come forward with what we might have done on that subject. But it's the right place to vest the question, which is how do we ensure that people are looked after as well as possible towards the end of their lives when they are frail. So I think that's a good starting point. Personally, I think that there's a number of different parts to it. There's clearly the direct question within social care of funding reform and how that's paid for, which is an important topic, but not the one for discussion today. But there's also the attitude and approach that we take as a society, and changing expectations and standards. The whole of healthcare has changed gradually over a generation to be far more based on the wishes of individuals and their choices. This is true throughout healthcare. And it's true towards the end of life as well. So there's far more examples of people writing living wills. There's far more scrutiny around do not resuscitate instructions, quite rightly. And my view is that this debate has been taken over the last few years with each piece one at a time, and some pieces we haven't come to, like the social care reform. But the right question is, how does the whole fit together and make policy, and more broadly than policy, society's attitude to caring for people at the end of their lives greater than the sum of the constituent policy parts.
Thank you very much. Now, you met Noel Conway, I think, some time ago, who had motor neuron disease. What did you gain from that meeting? What did you learn from that meeting? And you've known other senior figures who have wrestled with this in the medical profession too. What did that do for you?
Well, I think it's incredibly important that we listen. I think it's hard because by the nature of this of the debate about who we are caring for, people at the end of their lives don't always have the strongest voices. Now, I mean, actually, we are hearing more and more of people's voices and what they would wish, and there are brave people like Noel Conway who are willing to talk about it and willing to talk to senior figures and explain their point of view. I've been really struck by and moved by the conversations I had with Sir Paul Cosford, who I worked very closely with. And
wonderful man.
His, like many people in the medical profession, his view had changed, and he was very eloquent about about how his view had changed and why, and made a very empathetic case. And I talked to him a lot in his last few months. And I had the privilege of him giving me his very personal reflections on this, both as a public health professional and as somebody who was sadly dying of cancer.
Yes, I met him too and had a very similar experience and reaction to him. But as well as the individuals who we've met, one of the things I've noticed in the last year is the extraordinary international change. I wonder whether you'd also noticed that. I mean, in Southern Ireland, which after all is a deeply conservative Catholic country, this issue's been opened up, a committee's been set up to pursue it in the Dáil. We've seen the referendum in New Zealand, and our colleagues in Scotland look very likely to take this issue up after the elections in Holyrood. I mean, what sitting, as it were, at the head of the UK health department, what's been your reaction to the changing of views around the world?
Well, this is clearly there are many countries that are considering this debate. As health secretary, I think that it's absolutely right that it's a debate for Parliament, and that's a long-standing convention. And we had what I thought was a very high-quality debate in Parliament that you instigated, Andrew, a few months ago, and I was privileged to be able to take part in that debate at the dispatch box. But I'm also clear that as health secretary, my responsibility is to ensure that firstly that the discussion is as well informed as possible, but secondly that the areas that touch on the assisted dying debate that are government policy, like social care, are properly addressed. And as I say, I think that it needs to be we need to consider the whole in the round, the whole question of how we support people at the end of their lives as a whole topic. Now, for us parliamentarians and those of us in government, that creates an unusual situation, which is that government is the decision maker in some of these areas of policy, and Parliament is rightly the decision maker in others. But that shouldn't stop us trying to have a debate that brings all of these questions together. So, of course, I've seen what's happened elsewhere in the world. The other thing that struck me from what I've observed from elsewhere in the world is this shouldn't really be a debate in the abstract. I'd like to see, as I said in Parliament, a high quality public debate on this subject, so that people's views can then be reflected, and it'll be up for Parliament to articulate those views.
Yes, that brings me on to a very important point, because I asked you in a health questions whether or not we could have some better data to inform the debate, and you seem to me to be very conscious of the importance of data and a fact-based debate taking place, and the importance of understanding this horrific statistic that of the people who commit suicide, it may well be that 1 in 7 is terminally ill. And it seems to me to be incredibly important to get to the bottom of this. And I wondered, whether you'd thought further since you kindly answered my question, because I know that Sirian Darman, the head of the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, he's interested in these figures. He's keen to help if you ask him to do so. So I just wondered, on that issue of data, that particular piece of research seems to me to be incredibly important if we're to advance a proper and well-founded public debate on this matter.
Well, yes. So I have written to Sir Ian Diamond and asked him to consider what should be published in terms of the statistics that can inform the debate in this country, in particular with respect to this question on which there is partial information in the public domain on suicides of those who have particular conditions, which is a very specific way of that the question has been answered. And also in terms of whether we can shed more light on the data of those travelling to other countries, in particular Switzerland, in order to die at a time of their choosing. So that is I've written to the ONS. It is rightly a task for the ONS, but I think that I think that this is important. I think that it's important that public debate is informed by the best statistics. And whatever your view on this subject, it's an important subject and a sensitive one. And I think that the data that should underpin a high quality debate should be thought through by the ONS and published in the best way possible, as they publish on so many other parts of our lives. So I've asked the ONS to consider doing that, and it is absolutely a matter for them how they and indeed whether they go about doing that. But I think anybody who believes in high quality public discourse would want to see an independent and impartial set of facts on which we can then have a discussion.
Well, I'm very grateful for that, because particularly having asked you the question in the House of Commons, it seems to me that I couldn't ask for more than the Secretary of State seeking to find the facts so that colleagues can make up their mind, wider public can make up their mind on the basis of evidence that is fact-based, and which would be very important to informing this debate. So thank you very much indeed for that. That's the sort of fact side, and then there's the emotional side of real life experience. And we're going to hear from Barbara a little later on, Barbara Wall, who's very kindly joined us. But I remember not so long ago speaking to a consultant in the health service who was suffering from terminal breast cancer, and she was going to go to Switzerland. I think she was one of the last people to be able to do that. And I was immensely moved by what she told me. She was not going to allow any member of her family to accompany her. She was a young woman, I would say. She was going to make this difficult journey on her own, as she subsequently did, and it was covered in the Sunday Times as well. But actually, talking to her over Zoom and meeting her in that way, the thing that struck me most about that was that there are vulnerable people on both sides of this debate. You know, we talk quite rightly about people not being pushed by extraneous factors like their family into deciding when they want to die themselves. But equally, there are other people like this consultant in your workforce who was extremely vulnerable as she headed off to end her life in Switzerland, and that had a big impact on me. I must say.
Well, I think that's right. You know, people's views of this do change. I think the argument that we must protect those who are vulnerable from being coerced or from feeling that they ought to go down this route. I think that is an important and valid argument, but it is one of many that we need to consider. That's why I think a public debate is the right thing to be doing now, and a well-informed public debate, because I think it's particularly important in this debate because there are some people whose voices can't be heard, and there are people whose voices can't be heard because who would otherwise have an experience to share. So I'm thinking in particular of people who haven't been able to travel to Switzerland, but have died and can't tell us what they would have preferred in retrospect. So we do therefore have to be incredibly sensitive to all of the different perspectives and the suffering that that people experience, and we have to balance these very difficult questions. And so I think that those who publicly talk about their experiences as they are when they have a terminal prognosis, I think they're very brave, and I think those voices are really important. And so, you know, whether as a member of the NHS workforce or others who've come forward, I think it's a very, very important part of us sensitively finding the best way forward.
Yes, and I mean, part of what struck me about this woman was that you know, it requires money to go to Switzerland, so it's not a choice that is available to everybody, or indeed very many people. And she said that she was a great respecter of Britain as a country, a free country, where you know, we gave people choice and freedom over their lives. But she said she felt cheated, really, that she had to go to Switzerland and could not exercise this choice in the United Kingdom. And I must say, it had a big effect on me anyway. That goes on to the next thing, which is I've noticed that the medics in your staff have moved very considerably in their views. I mean, historically, MPs have been very influenced by the views of the medical profession. And I'm married to a doctor, and I'm very conscious that doctors who have literally the power of life and death over us at times in our lives, they're not a profession which hold back in putting their views, whether it's about the government or anything else. But I have
the Secretary of State from time to time.
Yeah, I'm sure. But it is interesting, isn't it, that the Royal College of Physicians and GPs, as well as the British Medical Association, have found a significant shift in doctors' views in recent years, with the majority of doctors wanting medical bodies to move away from their historic opposition so that they can properly represent the many different views that their members hold. Have you, in your Olympian position at the top of the pyramid, and you must hear an awful lot from doctors, have you detected this change?
Yes, there's no doubt about it. It's part of a broader change. It's part of a broader change towards a culture of medicine that is more acutely focused on an individual's wishes, and more personalized, that you see across a whole series of different parts of medicine. So I would say that it's there's a broad culture shift across medicine from, the doctor will explain what he thinks best to medicine being practiced as a discussion between the doctor and his or her patient. And so I think that it's part of a broader change, but it's undoubtedly there, and you can see it in the analysis that the Royal Colleges pursue. Now, it's natural. If you go into medicine, it's a vocation for saving lives and alleviating suffering, and so it's natural, of course, that doctors would be concerned to extend life wherever reasonably possible. That's a perfectly reasonable starting point. But it is very clear that that views have been shifting over the past few years.
And it's not surprising, given that 84% of our constituents now believe that the law should be changed. I've got 4 questions which I'm anxious to fit in from our supporters, members of Dignity in Dying, who would like to take this opportunity through me of asking you some questions. But there's one other question I want to ask you, and I don't know whether you will wish to answer it or not, but I'm sure you will tell us, which is this: that I've completely changed my mind on this subject since I entered the House of Commons. I arrived in the House of Commons absolutely opposed to Dignity in Dying, and I've changed my mind. I mean, it's probably a product of age and getting older, but I've changed my mind because, the only times I've been in tears in my own constituency surgery And on the whole, I don't think it's a good idea for the Member of Parliament for the Royal Town of Sutton Coldfield to be in tears in his constituency surgery. But the only time has been when constituents have come to tell me about their desire and their loved ones' desire to be able to end their life when they were terminally sick, and or else alternatively, the story about how their loved one was unable to do that and died sometimes in terrible and tragic circumstances. And I've changed my mind as a result of that constituency experience, but I've also changed my mind because I would want it for myself and for a member of my family in such circumstances. So one of the reasons why I agreed to be the co-chair with Karen of this very well run and very good organisation is because, having changed my mind, I want to ensure that these issues really are debated. And I think the time is coming when members of Parliament may again be asked to exercise their judgment on behalf of their constituents on this issue. And clearly it's right that Parliament should do it. It shouldn't be being made by happenstance in the law courts. And I remember on these sort of issues when Ken Clarke was Home Secretary, and he always used to get up to the dispatch box and explain that while he was the Home Secretary, he was also the Member of Parliament for Rushcliffe, and he was speaking on these issues of conscience as the Member of Parliament for Rushcliffe. But I wondered whether you've had a journey on this and whether you've reached any preliminary conclusions or any conclusions at all.
Well, like you, as a constituency Member of Parliament, I entered Parliament and when asked about this by constituents said that I was worried about the pressure that might be brought to bear. And therefore, on balance, I was not in favour. But I think that this public debate is important. And partly it's because it depends what the exact proposal is. Getting the proposal right is important. I think that the public debate is the most important thing. And I think that it's right that we're having it. And I think that it should be as well informed as possible. So with my, when we vote on conscience issues, I walk through the lobbies on a free vote in the same way that everybody does. And in fact, there was a free vote this afternoon. I would like to see exactly what any proposal is. And I think that it is a matter for now. I think the most important thing is to have the full debate so that everybody can express their views.
The decision that we have taken is that we will seek to bring to Parliament at some point in the next 3 to 4 years a measure which won't satisfy some of the people on our side of the argument. It would be very tightly drawn. You'd have to be within 6 months of the end of your life. You'd have to satisfy not one but 2 doctors that you were within 6 months of the end of your life and that you wanted to be put to sleep in order to avoid the suffering that might well await you at the end of life. And that in addition to that, the additional block would be that a High Court judge would say that, would hear what you had to say and the evidence from the 2 doctors, and would then confirm that it was indeed your own opinion. And so it would be very like the law in Oregon, which was introduced 23 years ago, and which has bedded in very well and has never been changed, and there's never been pressure to change it. So we are thinking in terms of a very moderate measure, which would be, as I say, not as far going as many would wish, but which we think, particularly with 84% of constituents believing that the law should be changed, might possibly command consent. So that is the sort of direction that those of us who take this view believe would be right.
Well, I can absolutely, I can see that, and I'd want to consider exactly how that would work. I have seen this, the Oregon statute has been in place for a long time, and that a consensus has built up behind it once it's in place. I think that's important because I think the sensitivity around this debate is an important part of it, and hence I'm not leaping to conclusions, but wanting to make sure that the evidence is there for a proper debate.
Thank you very much. So the first of 4 questions I hope we may have time for is from Dr. Stephen Duckworth, who is a tetraplegic after a rugby accident in his youth. And he asks, forgive me, I'm going to read his question, what safeguards are currently in place to protect dying people from being coerced by relatives to seek out suicide as a solution to their unbearable suffering? Surely legislation permitting assisted dying with safeguards would create safeguards that are currently not available, particularly to vulnerable people.
Yes, I think that there is another reason for us to be discussing this, as well as those that we've discussed so far, and that is that the current way the law is in practice is not, in fact, by design. Essentially, it's a consequence of a whole series of judgments and some quite old statute. So I think that is an important consideration, and it comes back, I suppose, to the start of our discussion, Andrew, which is vesting this question in the broader question of how we support people at the end of life. I think is important, and because there are unfairnesses in the existing law.
Thank you very much. Well, that's the answer to Stephen's question. So the next question is from Sarah Fenton, who accompanied her husband with Huntington's disease to Dignitas. And Sarah asks this: when someone is given the reassurance of knowing they will die peacefully and painlessly, like my husband Keith was when he traveled to die at Dignitas in 2016, the fear of death is removed and they can spend the precious few days they have left living their life. How can we justify telling terminally ill people they must endure suffering and pain in their final days rather than having quality time with their loved ones?
Yes, well, it's a very moving testimony, and it's in fact, and this is it's something I've talked about with others who were close to dying themselves, who were close to me. So I think I think it's very moving, a very powerful way of putting it. Of course, a death by its nature is different, and that strengthens the argument for choice, and it strengthens the argument for people to have their wishes taken as the primary consideration.
Yes, thank you. I must say, I thought that Sarah put it in a way that, in terms of brevity, could not have been clearer or more well described. So the next question is from a former district nurse, Pauline Carroll. And Pauline says this: my district nursing experience convinced me that the terminally ill, whose pain or distress cannot be controlled by even excellent palliative care, want the option of assisted dying. What do you think is the biggest obstacle to achieving workable, safeguarded legislation in this country? I don't think I'm going to let you get away with saying our colleagues.
Well, no, I think well, there's many, but the one I'm stressing, and I hope we can make some progress on in the short term, is making sure that the facts that underpin the debate are properly assessed and addressed and published. The testimony is another important part of the discussion, and that is that is how we can address these things best. And by having a I just because this is a subject that is not subject to a formal government position doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a properly rigorous and informed discussion. That's what I really feel about it. I feel like, somehow because it's an issue of conscience, therefore people have shied away from talking about this. And so I think that the work that the APPG is doing and that Dignity in Dying is doing is important in making sure we're properly informed of what it's like, and so that people can see the importance of those choices in the same way that choices have opened up for us in so many other parts of our lives.
Thank you very much. Well, the last question from one of our members is from Dr. Tim Howard, who's a retired GP and former chair of the GMC's Fitness to Practice Tribunals. And Dr. Tim says the following: New Zealand, Canada, Australia, Spain, and many other countries we accept as civilized and caring have listened to their citizens and allowed assisted dying in very specific circumstances without the sky falling in. Why don't we? And actually, that's his question. I think it's an interesting point as to whether, the Anglo-Saxons are different from these countries, which the fact that America has gone down this route quite substantially suggests isn't the reason.
Well, some states in America, absolutely, and you picked out Oregon before. It's this one is a rhetorical question more than anything, and makes its point. There's a reason that I'm not being more definitive, and the reason is that I think that as health secretary, I think in a way I have a role in ensuring that the discussion and the debate here is as high quality as possible. I will, should the question be put and a specific proposal come forward, I will look at it and consider all these things and come to a view. But I hope you don't take my reserving my position as anything other than wanting to ensure that there is the proper discussion and debate, and that we can make sure that it's fully informed by facts. I think that is important, and I think that having that discussion is the right thing, and that's what meetings like this are all about.
Absolutely, and indeed, one of our colleagues and friends has just sent me a WhatsApp saying that he understands very much your position in that respect. So I'm sure we all will. Well, look, you've been extremely kind and generous with your time. I think you have also very kindly agreed to just stay so that Barbara, who's going to talk to us for 5 minutes, and we are almost bang on time, so hopefully this will work, is going to talk to us about her experience and the story of her father, who had terminal esophageal cancer and did take his own life. And just before we hear from Barbara, perhaps I can encourage any of our colleagues across the House of Commons who have thoughts or views to put them in the chat, or if they don't want to put them in the chat, to let me or Karen know, because obviously we are very keen to understand the support for either side that exists among all of us, because we will have to exercise our judgment if, as I say, in the next 4 years, this comes before the House of Commons. But Matt, thank you very much indeed for giving us so much of your time. The last time I did an interview like this was interviewing David Cameron about his book for the West Midlands. which was a far less serious occasion, but this is a very, very serious issue. And I do think with you as our Secretary of State for Health, we are in very thoughtful and safe hands. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. And now I know we all are very grateful indeed to Barbara. And Barbara, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for having the courage and giving the importance to the subject of coming to talk to us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. For reasons of conciseness and accuracy, I'm going to read my story. I'd like to talk to you about my dad, Charlie Cecil Kentish, who was known to everybody as Chaz. My dad was very active. Even in his 90s, he would regularly walk and cycle 5 miles. He'd served in the army and had run a gentleman's clothing business for many years. Following my mum's death in 2010, Dad did all his own shopping and kept his bungalow in an immaculate condition. He was very sociable and talkative, and never someone to sit in silence, very engaged with politics and current affairs. He'd regularly visit the Snetterton motor racing track, one of the reasons he chose to relocate to Norfolk in his later years. He was a man who loved his food, especially his regular half pint of Guinness, and lunch at the local pub with his neighbours. This was not the man who was discovered in his garage on the 13th of November 2016, just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, having taken his own life by hanging at the age of 94, months after being diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer. This was not the end my father deserved, and I feel passionately that he should have been spared those final few weeks and had the choice to be assisted to die peacefully when the time was right for him. He had been diagnosed in January 2016 after struggling to swallow for some time. The prognosis was not good, and he was clear from the start that he did not want to undergo invasive treatments or procedures that would only prolong his life by a matter of months. Over the following months, Dad endured awful symptoms. The tumour caused him to regurgitate food and drink and caused horrible secretions which he had to regularly expectorate. This prevented him from sleeping through the night and also made it difficult for him to socialise with his friends in the way he'd done before his diagnosis. He lost the ability to swallow, which meant he could not eat any of the foods he enjoyed, and he hated the build-up drinks he was given instead. His weight dropped from 10 stone to 5 stone, and he became too weak to do any of the things he loved. My dad received excellent support from his GP, the district nursing team, hospital palliative care team, community palliative care nurses, dietitian and occupational therapists. But he felt so frustrated. He was always very polite, but he'll tell them, there's nothing you can do to help me. At one stage, when the wonderful palliative care consultant asked Dad if there was anything she could do, he replied, you could put an injection in my hand so I can finish myself off. I know you can't do that. That's all I want to, but all I want to do is die. He would regularly say to me and to his close friends, he just wanted to go to sleep and not wake up. For him, it wasn't just the physical symptoms, but also the mental torture. He used to love watching sports on TV, but he couldn't even do that because he felt tormented by all the food adverts. About 3 weeks before his death, Dad knew he was losing his dignity and particularly bowel control, which was especially hard to bear for such a proud man of his generation. The effects of Dad's cancer robbed him of the control and independence that he valued in his life. After 94 years of living on his own terms, he wanted to die on his own terms. He knew about the palliative care that was available to him, but he also knew its limitations. It couldn't make his symptoms disappear, and he just didn't want to spend his final months like that. On the day of Dad's death, I had tried to ring him, but he didn't pick the phone up after several calls. So I asked his neighbours, who were great friends of Dad, to check in on him, as they did regularly. Peter and John went round and discovered a note on the front door saying that he had taken his own life, to call the police and he'd be found in the garage. Despite this note, Peter and John went in and found Dad hanging from a rafter. They were distraught. The police were called and a first responder arrived who had to cut my dad down. On the morning before Dad took his own life, he had cleaned the bungalow, done his laundry, emptied the fridge. He had clearly planned it out to have minimum impact on others. He would have been devastated to learn of the effect his death had on people close to him and his local community. A few days after his death, I found a note to me. Please phone the police. The garage door and side door are open. I will sign off now as I am unable to cope with this illness. All my love to you, Barbara, and thank you for all the help you have given me. Pa, 3 kisses, and then signed Charles C. Kentish. Then came the agonising wait for the inquest, an intense and stressful process which took the best part of 6 months, which I feel further compounded my grief. What constantly comes to my mind is that none of this need to have happened. My dad should have been able to decide when the time was right for him and be supported to die on his own terms. We could have got his neighbours, friends and family together for a final goodbye, visited the Snetterton racetrack one last time, and then let him go to sleep peacefully in his own bed. Before I say the last couple of words, I'd just like to show you a picture of him, taken about 2 years before he died. I ask MPs and peers in attendance today to listen to my story and reflect whether the current law is working. I hope you'll agree that we need a deeper understanding of the impact that it has on terminally ill people, their loved ones and communities, and find out how many more experiences like mine are happening across the country. I know I'm not the only one. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Barbara, very much indeed for that beautiful and moving testimony. And I think your old dad would be very proud of what you have said about him tonight. I don't know whether we've got 3 questions, Matt. I don't know whether you might have time just quickly to answer them, or you may well have to leave immediately because you are now over time.
Go ahead. Go ahead. That was very moving, Barbara. Thank you.
Yes, it was indeed. And thank you very much indeed for coming. So Hilary Ben asks the following. We are currently in a situation where assisted dying has, in effect, been made legal in the UK as long as you have money and can go to Switzerland. This is because the CPS quite rightly has reached the conclusion that it would not be in the public interest to prosecute family members who accompany their loved ones on that final journey. I do not see how we as parliamentarians can continue to sustain this.
Well, Hilary, as a long-standing supporter of assisted dying, I'm not surprised to hear you make this argument. And this is why, again, another reason to have a debate that is well informed. The data published by Dignitas show that 475 people traveled to Dignitas from the UK, and in the 22 years up to 2020. But we've seen far more people who appear, although we don't have the evidence properly, appear to have taken the steps that Barbara, that your father took. This is another reason to have a proper public debate on this subject.
Thank you very much, Steve. Now, Danny Kruger, who is our colleague, of course, who chairs the other side of the debate, but we're very pleased to have him join us this afternoon. Very grateful to him for coming. He asks this: does the Secretary of State recognise the huge improvements in analgesics pain management science in recent years? And if it were possible to all but eliminate suffering at the end of life, would he agree we should not change the law? Now, in the interest of fairness, I thought I ought to put that question to you, although the answer is probably fairly clear.
Well, look, two things to say. The first is I have enormous amount of respect for Danny's view, and I think this came through when we had the debate on this subject in the House of Commons a couple of months ago. It's really a clinical question, because if it were possible is essentially that is a clinical judgment. But again, this is the sort of thing that should be debated. And there are some people who would say that even if that were so, then they would still want choice. But there are others, and I know there's wider arguments that Danny, you make, in terms of not wanting a well-meaning change to harbour in something that's more of a challenge. So I think that I'm very glad that you're here, and I think that it's a reasonable, the right discussion to be having, and I look forward to coming to your APPG in due course as well. And in a way, I see, I think that all of us should be able to make sure we can not only make our points, but have a reasonable debate to try to come to the right conclusion.
I strongly agree with that. Finally, there's one other question which I think is worth putting to the Secretary of State, who's being so generous with his time, and it's from Baroness Watkins of Tavistock. And it is this: is it possible to ensure that any new legislation also is linked to advances directives? I assume this is it sounds quite technical to me, but I assume this is to do with dementia, is it?
Well, this is an advanced decision, is a decision to refuse treatment, and essentially lets your healthcare team know your wishes if you're not able to communicate them. And I think this is an important question because many people write living wills, but there isn't a comprehensive legislative framework in which a living will can be taken into account. And so I do think that's one of the areas of law that is currently unsatisfactory. But it's not for me, from the position of government, to propose exactly what the answer to that is. But again, I know I refer to needing a debate. This question demonstrates why it's important both to have that, but also brings us right back to where we started, which is that there is more to this question than the specific detail of a legislative change on assisted dying, because there are questions of how consent is granted, how it's communicated, at what stage when people may go from being competent to not having full cognitive function, that need to be taken into account and need to be addressed. And increasingly, I think in the clinical sphere, people wanting certainty in that area. We saw during the pandemic there was a debate, there was a problem where in some parts of the country there were allegations that that do not resuscitate orders, which are closely connected to advanced decisions, were put in place on a blanket basis. That is completely wrong, and we had to tackle it. But not having a framework around this whole question of end of life, that has been not having a framework that's been put in place actively through considered debate and then policy making, I think is something that should be addressed. And I think it's better to have the debate first and then come to conclusions than to take each element one at a time.
Well, look, thank you so much, Matt, for giving us so much overtime as well. I know that you've got to speed off to your other duties, but thank you very much indeed for a very reassuring and interesting contribution to our debate. And I think
thank you, Matt.
We're coming towards the end of our time now, but I think I'm now going to hand back to Karen to close the meeting. So, Matt, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Apologies,
Karen,
crossing over. And thank you very much, Matt. Very, very useful and interesting to hear from you directly. Thanks for your time. I think we were just midway through. We were also midway through. Just wanted to complete our AGM formalities as well, just to be clear to parliamentarians of the group. that in terms of financial statements for this year, there has been no income or expenditure received for the group and the Secretariat, which do give us such great support from Dignity and Di. And I'd really like to commend the officers of that group for their support as a Secretariat and the very sensitive work they do with members of the public who bring forward their stories, such as Barbara. Thank you for your time and support of our work. But they fall before the registration threshold, so there's nothing for us to register this year. I think that leaves it for me to thank Andrew for excellent chairing this afternoon. For colleagues who haven't put anything in the chat, if want to talk to myself or Andrew about any of the issues raised or share your views with us, really happy to chat. And I know for parliamentarians in the Lords, Molly Meacher, very keen to talk to people as well of all sides and views. We all want to get the best outcome for people at the end of their life, as the Secretary of State said. Without further ado, I'll let everybody else get on with the rest of their evening. But thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.